And now on to the classes themselves, from changes, weapons, personalities, backstories, and augments. Note, 90% of the weapons, augments, and even characters I don't really have official names for, and I'm just using placeholders that can definitely be changed in the future. And I don't have the slightest clue what to call the characters other than their official titles, which will just be code names, but as for their real names, someone else may have to come up with that. I'll just give vague outlines, as well as for weapons, augments, and etc. Also, like, I just have a bunch of placeholder images in my head for what the mercenaries actually look like, lol, with some very vague concepts minus a few. Also, augments are activated through a button press unless they're active, and it's always on, so you don't have to scroll through your scroll wheel to activate them. First off, the Heavy. He will be based off of, very loosely that is, Mr. T, especially after further research into who Mr. T actually was. Basically, he's a Vietnam vet turned actor turned mercenary who's, thanks to his frivolous spending and his wife's extreme frivolous spending, is now in deep debt to multiple criminal organizations, and he's forced to do mercenary work to pay off the debt. Basically, big tough black man, whose personality isn't just going to be black guy, if you know what I mean. And the only real similarities besides his ethnicity and military service he shares with Mr. T is that he was in a show like the A-Team, and he has his own cartoon that he's ashamed of. So he's loud, proud, and tough as nails, with a larger-than-life personality and blunt way of speaking, very much like people from the 80s. Also, he doesn't have the ridiculous jewelry or haircut.
No, 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 no. Look at the top of his head.
His main weapon will of course be an updated minigun, but a sleek modern-day 1980s styled one that won't look cobbled together like the TF2 Heavy's weapon, which will essentially act exactly the same, minus the random nonsense from TF2, so I guess a lot more accurate then. His secondary will be the Super Shotgun, which will literally just be an upgrade from the normal shotgun, as you are the heavy weapons guy after all, so there's no need to have a downside in any way, as you're already the slowest class, and the normal shotgun is basically useless for the heavy anyway. It'll look like the standard police shotgun with a large grip over the cocking mechanism, which I think is the style from TF Classic for the Super Shotgun, so it'll look like an upgraded version of that. And it will have the same stats as the shotgun, but much more damage, so it's actually viable with the heavy. His melee will of course be his fists, but they will have a special ability allowing you to charge your augment, which will be called Warrior's Fury. Essentially, by doing damage, you'll be charging up a meter. When full, you'll be able to activate, giving you several seconds of all damage reduced by 50%, minus headshots from snipers and backstabs, of course. Gotta keep it balanced. Essentially, in the in-game story, the Heavy had a magical spell placed upon his fists by a witch doctor, giving them this ability, which can fully charge your augment in 3 to 4 punches, whereas normally you'll have to do 300 damage with other weapons to charge it. The Heavy will glow slightly magically, especially his eyes, to indicate when it's happening, as well as, no doubt, making a loud shout. I can see a comic explaining how he got his hands enchanted by a very poor voodoo practitioner somewhere in the middle of the deep bush, where after he gets the spell, the sorcerer asks for payment, but he gives some sort of excuse like his accountant will get on it. As the witch doctor explains, he's so poor, his son had to use his grandmother as shoes to walk 50 miles towards the nearest watering hole in lion-infested jungles. As the Heavy slowly slinks away without paying. Your melee, of course, will be able to charge or affect other augments in the future, and this is so you'll actually use your melee as the Heavy, as I'm doing this with all of the melee weapons, giving them some sort of special buff to make sure people actually use them, not just when they're out of bullets. And as for his real name, something tough and befitting that I'm sure someone else will think of, but they'll just call him Heavy as a code name. Next up, the Scout. He will be based off of action movie stars, particularly from the 1990s. The reason he's based off of action stars from the 90s is from a Sylvester Stallone quote where he said that the rubber muscles on the bat suit from Batman '89 were the fall of the buff action star. Think of him like a mix between Johnny Cage and the original Team Fortress 2 Scout. He's a big-named actor born and raised in New York City who's looking to expand his portfolio and prove the world and his fans he's as tough as he says he is. Despite being actually scrawny with only slight muscle tone because he still has to be the fast-running scout after all. He's the typical actor full of himself, extremely cocky, arrogant, and he believes he's God's gift to the whole world who thinks very, very, very highly of himself. So he's a massive douche. Typical Hollywood type, especially back in the day. Also, he's the TF2 Scout's favorite actor at this time. Yet again, don't know his name, but something you'd hear from New York that's incredibly trashy, as he's no doubt from a low-income background. And in my head, he just looks like a tan TF2 Scout with like 50s Elvis-style hair and clothes similar to Tom Jones. I guess he's Italian then, but he'll definitely look way different, except maybe a similar build to the Scout, but that's just a placeholder in my head. Of course, his primary weapon will be a small shotgun, comparable to the scattergun. It'll act the same, matching the Team Fortress 2 Scout's playstyle, but of course more accurate due to TFN's game design. It will definitely look like something off of a high-budget movie based on a real-life small shotgun, maybe even a movie reference if I can find something that could match. His secondary will be a 9mm pistol, exactly like the normal Scout's pistol in function, but way more new and shiny and accurate thanks to no random bullet spread. Also, it'll have proper animation, so the hammer will go back when fired. His melee weapon will be a baseball bat. A nice new classic for the 1980s, wood bat pulled straight out of an old-time baseball field. However, there will be a row of small lights going up the bat, 15 in total. And upon each consecutive hit, your swing speed will double, with 5 lights lighting up at a time, first red, then yellow, then green, maxing out at 3 consecutive hits to have a maximum speed of triple the swing speed. Unless you miss or don't hit an enemy player, then all of the lights will go dark, and the multiplier will start over. Basically, if you are skilled enough, you could beat an enemy to death before they could even know it. And it still does the base damage of the bat, so it rewards risk-taking players who have the agility and timing to chain their bat hits. And last but not least, his augment called the NA Flash. Essentially, it allows the scout to shoot himself straight very quickly in any direction he's looking, several feet, possibly 10 to 15, while allowing him to pass through any enemies and enemy buildings. However, he cannot attack nor change his direction, only stopping himself prematurely. But you can still look around, allowing yourself to pass through enemies, then turn around mid-charge and shoot them in the back, or face a completely different direction and get behind cover after you've stopped. And yes, you can go straight up, essentially giving yourself a triple jump, but you obviously can't maneuver during the NA Flash. But you could just shoot yourself straight up and then still have your 2 extra jumps, so that's an option for more mobility. And passing through enemies as the scout while being able to turn and look at them just makes the scout much more viable for noobs not too good at dodging. And yes, there'll be a cooldown. I don't want it to be too broken. Moving on to the soldier. In a far-off dystopian land, riddled with strife, suffering, and hardship, one lone man stands in defiance. He is the judge, jury, and executioner. He is the law. He is a former cop from Detroit. I was torn between either Baltimore or Detroit, but considering how Detroit was even described as a hellscape in the 80s, and it's literally worse now than I think was portrayed in RoboCop, so it was the perfect location for a dystopian matching the dark thinking of the 80s for a renegade cop. Whereas the TFN Heavy and Scout are based off of actors, the Team Fortress Neon Soldier is based off of every cliche and stereotypical movie and TV show cop from the 80s to the 90s that can logically be put together without contradicting themselves. His family was killed. His partner betrayed him. Other cops are corrupt. Crime-ridden society. His partner was killed. The police chief who was his best friend was killed one day before retirement, and whatever else overused plot point and storyline you could possibly think of that could go together, making him an amalgamation of classic 80s and 90s tropes. And the placeholder image in my head of him is literally just a soldier wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses. He'll obviously look different, but maybe we can keep the leather jacket and have like a trench coat, or whatever the jackets are called that are like half the length of a trench coat, maybe more of a detective style. And I think he should look slightly like Sylvester Stallone, both as a reference and the fact that his skin that will go along with his alternative loadout will go perfectly with this, which I will get into later. Of course his personality is rugged, bitter, hardened veteran, who will no doubt shoot out cocky one-liners straight out of a classic action hero, consisting of most of his dialogue, as well as heavy doses of brutal comebacks and harsh quips. Anyway, his primary weapon will be a small bazooka, which will function identically to the TF2 soldier's rocket launcher, but will be carried under his shoulder instead of on top of it. Not like in his armpit, but casually near his elbow, following the length of his arm, like certain fictional characters that are large that carry bazookas. His secondary will be a Winchester rifle, straight out of Terminator 2, which will be a shotgun, but will have longer range, at the cost of a slower reload, and a slightly slower fire rate. Figuring he is the soldier, so he's already technically a long-range class, and the rifle will be able to help you with pesky, small, quick classes without wasting rockets, or enemies you otherwise couldn't hit with splash, as most players definitely cannot aim their rockets with extreme accuracy. Also, if they're too close for comfort, hence why it's still a shotgun, so you don't damage yourself with your rockets. And his melee weapon will be a classic police baton with a light strip going up it. It will do the same damage as the shovel from Team Fortress 2, but it will have the perk from the equalizer, hence the light strip lighting up to indicate when your damage is maximum, like the Scout's bat. And it will not have the downside of the equalizer, as it is the stock melee weapon, so as base damage increases, no damage the lower your health gets, with no negativity. And I know there are some hardcore soldier mains out there wondering why it doesn't have the stats of the escape plan instead. The thing is, the average player wouldn't be inclined to run away even with the speed boost, and this seems much more logical as a last-ditch effort as enemies descend upon you as a better way of surviving for the typical player. And you are the soldier after all, so it doesn't seem logical just to run away in mid-battle, but instead fight your way out of it. Although there'll probably be a future update where there is a melee weapon with the escape plan's attributes added. As for his augment, it will be called the Street Strider, and it will allow the soldier to float in midair for several seconds. You'll move around at your walking speed, however, you can only float on one vertical plane, like you were standing on an invisible floor, and jumping turns it off, and you have to hit the ground in order to use it again, so you won't be able to inch your way upwards unless there was something to actually stand on. Think of the old saying, no one ever looks up, which is exactly what this augment is made to exploit, allowing the soldier to rocket jump himself up to a height and rain death upon his unsuspecting enemies. Also, you could totally save yourself from a big fall, as there's no fall damage once activated, and move over fall hazards. And the main animation will just be the bottom of the soldier's shoes glowing, kind of like M. Dyson from the Street Fighter movie. Yet another reference that wasn't even intended, lol. And he won't walk around in midair, as that will look stupid, but instead he'll just kind of lean in the direction he's moving while in a standing position. And yet again, this is another reason not to have the escape plan stats for the melee weapon, as you can literally float away in the air. And now on to the Demo Man. Or I should say, Demo Lass. Wait, what? Demo Lass? The Demo Man's a girl now? Yes, kind viewer, the demo is female now, but is not the result of Mr. DeGroot having a midlife crisis and getting a sex change. She is the niece of the TF2 soldier and godchild of the TF2 demo, Tabish Finnegan McGroot, so they are technically related in a way. She's a fun-loving adrenaline junkie, a small-town girl filled with determination and the drive to succeed, who's just as much as a die-hard patriot as her wacky uncle. And she's as dumb as the day is long. Unlike her uncle, who became Flanderized over the years, she'll start out incredibly stupid right from the get-go, minus some mild explanation for her dumbness, as receiving brain damage while training in childhood with her uncle and godfather Mr. DeGroot. But stupidity is only one character trait, as like I've stated, she's just as much as a die-hard patriot as her uncle, who's just as determined as she is dumb, and refuses to never give up, as honestly she's too stupid to know when, how, and what giving up even is in the first place. She's sort of based off of the Ronald Reagan era heroines like Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, and the large amount of patriotism during the Cold War as a response to the Russian threat, while being sort of an anti-Mary Sue, in that she's heavily flawed in her low intelligence, but will always keep carrying on, and trying no matter what, refusing to ever back down. Her physical appearance will obviously be female, with reddish-orange hair in a ponytail, freckles, and a hefty sort of farm girl build. Like she's muscular, an athlete basically, but not freakishly muscular, like fetish art. She's definitely got some pounds on her, and dare I say she's thick in body as in mind. I can see a brief backstory going something like this. So finally, after many attempts, the demo lass was able to graduate the 3rd grade at the ripe old age of 21. Then she decided to invade Russia in a preemptive strike. But not knowing where Russia is, or even how to spell Russia to find it, she set off in a random direction, assuming she'll either will come across the Reds, or find the edge of the world, and go off in another direction when she did. Eventually she found her way to Canada, which she assumed was Russia due to the snow and strange accents, and proceeded to start bombing everything in sight as quickly as possible. But as the Canadians were apologizing for inconveniencing her as they were being exploded, she would respond with, "I don't speak hammer and sickle," then went right back to blowing them up. Once she ran out of explosives, she was put into a mental asylum, where after several months she accidentally managed to free herself after making a homemade mini-nuke for Arts and Crafts Fridays she learned from her uncle. When she escaped, she followed her own footsteps around the facility for several months, surviving off of squirrel meat and melted snow, before finally being picked up by Miss Pauline to take up the mantle of her godfather. Her name will definitely be some Midwestern patriotic sounding name, probably something with Susan, after Susan B. Anthony and other famous women from the US. And since she has a name, I guess she'll be the soldier's sister's kid, as he uses a pseudonym and I don't want to arbitrarily give him a last name. Also, she'll spit out as much brutal insults just like her uncle, on top of the sayings that will make her seem stupid to balance things out. Finally onto her weapons. Obviously her primary will be the grenade launcher, but shiny and new for the 1980s, which will have proper reloading animations for the chambers. Her secondary will of course be the sticky bomb launcher, but one that looks different to distinguish it from the TF2 version, and she'll probably hold it with both hands with a button on the side to visualize blowing up the sticky bombs, as it will work just like the old one, just look better with better animation. Her melee will be a stick or some kind of wood handle of something with either C4 or some kind of other form of explosive attached to the end. It'll do the same damage as the bottle, but have the blowback of the Alakul Cobber. However the fuck you say that. It won't have the explosion damage, obviously, that would damage the player, just the knockback and splash of the knockback to knockback enemies, also the player without the extra explosive damage. Basically, it's a way of getting enemies away from you, or hitting them into your explosives. As how annoying is it when enemies run past your bombs if you're missing, and you could just literally whack them backwards into your pills or stickies. Also, an idea just hit me of allowing the Demolas to maybe do a melee jump, but only once, as so you can't climb up walls. That really isn't needed, I'll explain next. With maybe like you do it once, then you cannot knock yourself back or upwards, I suppose, until your feet hit the ground again. And now on to the augment, the boom boots. Note, not actual boots, they're supposed to be cybernetic implants, or like magic with certain mercenaries. Essentially, the Demolas will have two sticky jumper bombs built into her feet, allowing her to sticky jump without actually blowing up your stickies, so you can actually leave your stickies in place while taking advantage of sticky jumping itself. Maybe not both, as that might be a little broken. But maybe like 1.5 sticky bombs from the sticky jumper, which will work exactly like the bombs themselves, other than you can't place them, and they're just an explosion on your feet. And of course they will knock you horizontally also, but only if you're moving in a direction, not standing still, so they'll actually be functional. I'd say only one bomb worth of force, but I don't think that's enough, and two might be too much having the Demolas practically fly, so maybe 75% of what both bombs could produce to make it balanced. Now on to the sniper. Many a year ago, in a far-off land, a man of high status was born to a wealthy family in Chile. They owned many industries and properties all throughout South America for many decades, until one day radical communists began destroying their wealth country by country. So the head of the family was forced to take up arms and take his fortune back by using his skills as a hunter. With assistance from the CIA using a special sniper rifle, he could smuggle across borders under the guise that it's a small game rifle. So the sniper is a rich guy from Chile, maybe in his 50s or 40s, who definitely has a wife and kids, who does the most 1980s thing imaginable, killing communists. And unlike most Spanish characters, he's not some poor immigrant, but a rich, sophisticated, intelligent, high society, high-class gentleman born into wealth. Basically, he's a snob who's disgusted by poor people, things that aren't ludicrously expensive, being cheap, and those dirty, filthy communists. Also, he is religious, Catholic in particular, which will no doubt come out in his dialogue, muttering words like dirty heathen or Santa Maria. Maybe even having a special taunt where he pulls out a cross in fear while cowering, or does the sign of the cross in one of his weapon taunts. Basically, he's old school South American, and my placeholder look for him is literally just the sniper with a tiny mustache cosmetic with brown skin and a black outfit, lol. And the reason he's from Chile is due to a certain president at the time being very anti-communist, with I'm sure him having a taunt that will say praise Pinochet on one of his main weapons like Sniper's God Save the Queen. His main weapon, of course, will be a sniper rifle, which will be incredibly decorated and look highly expensive, with one special feature to change it up from TF2 stock sniper rifle, an inverted damage fall off. That's right, you'll do more damage the further away your enemy is, and the closer they are, removing the need for the charge when scoped. There'll obviously be a damage limit, so you won't have an infinite damage increase with more distance. Let's say from around point blank to 10 feet in front of you, it will do a quarter damage from maximum. Then 10 to 25 feet in front of you, it will do half of maximum damage. and from 25 onwards it will do full damage like a charged sniper from TF2. So in theory you could quickscope someone as long as they were like 30 feet away. And yes, you can run around no scope, doing as much damage as a charged shot as long as you had the distance, making the sniper much more valid in combat, and of course headshots will do much more damage, and circumvent certain augments that reduce damage just for balance. As the sniper is supposed to be the ultimate long-range class, doing what the spy does, killing enemies instantly from a distance. The sniper will be called the long shot, or probably more correctly long shot in Spanish, or maybe something more sophisticated, with its nickname being the long shot to the other mercenaries. The secondary will be a machine gun, functioning identically to the one in Team Fortress 2, with the added benefit of no random bullshit variables to worry about. It'll probably be based off of some submachine gun used heavily in the 80s by the Chilean military, but no doubt fully furnished expensively to look amazing. The melee will be a whip. Just a whip. A big-ass bull whip functioning identically in terms of damage rate to the kukri, except you can hit people from like 15 feet away. You'll have the sniper rifle equivalent of a melee weapon, allowing you to hit targets much more further away, which will work great with the new way damage works, allowing the up-close and personal, at mid-range, style of fighting while not scoped a lot more viable. Or you could just smack annoying enemies standing on lower platforms than you if they start attacking you. Your augment will be a smoke screen. Essentially, when you press the button, the sniper will pull out a canister, where you can throw it at your feet with alt fire, or throw it in an arc to deploy it around teammates or trick enemies. When it strikes the ground, a pillar of white smoke, at least 5 snipers wide, possibly more if they're standing a few inches apart, and 3 snipers tall, lasting for 30 to 60 seconds, which will appear to the sniper who deployed it and their teammates, only seeing a thin outline of the pillar, seeing completely through it, but enemies will not be able to see through it whatsoever. The point is to hide yourself while sniping or your teammates, and throwing it is to confuse enemies who will shoot out the pillar of smoke while you are sniping them from somewhere else. And as for the sniper's name, the guy that is, something old school rich and sophisticated sounding. Something that people from the early 1900s that were rich called their children in Chile, or possibly just a pop culture stereotypical name used in the country. Moving along to the pyro. There are old legends that say deep within those vast woods lies an ancient malevolent evil. A being so wicked and cruel that even the devil himself weeps in fear. A creature so dark and sadistic that no man, no matter how brave he is, would ever dare enter its domain and live to tell the tale. But on moonless nights, deep within the eerie wilderness, they say you can hear a cry far off into the darkness, and it sounds like it's saying, "Medic." Yep, that's right. The pyro this time is a freaking literal serial killer mixed with an 80s slasher villain. A fitting character for such a notoriously scary class, and especially the way I've always seen the pyro as the ultimate short-range class, which will play into some gameplay changes I'll get into shortly. The TFN pyro will of course be wearing the typical flame retardant suit with the gas mask, although they will look obviously different, not necessarily 80s style, more like the 1950s to give him. Yes, it's definitely going to be he this time, I'll explain more shortly. A sort of retro look, like he's been murdering people for decades, as he has been doing in the lore, to make him all that more creepy. However, the suit, boots, gloves, and mask will be heavily worn, dirty, scratched up, looking like they have been in decades of use, with the overall colors being much more darker than the TF2 pyros. He'll have very large, broad shoulders going up to the bottom of his neck, so he can still be headshot from behind, giving him a distinct look with a much more intimidating frame overall. The goggles for the gas mask will actually move like eyeballs, much like certain SFM workshop versions of the pyro and the comic counterpart, giving him the ability to actually emote with his eyes, with small red lights coming from behind the glass acting like pupils. So like a freaking cartoon, basically, and he'll always sort of have a scowl on his goggle eyes. Also, he'll have a voice this time around, but it will be deep and growly, kind of like Hermes T. Hate from The Suffering. This is to separate him from the TF2 Pyro, as mumbling and not being able to speak is sort of his stick, and I wanted the Neon counterpart to be different. And whereas everyone thinks the Pyro is a psycho murderer, the Neon Pyro actually is a psycho murderer. His whole personality is he loves murder, torture, inflicting pain on others, sadistic acts of violence, brutality, dismemberment, beheadings, impaling, decapitation, they're technically different, and all other sorts of heinous bodily harm resulting in pain and death that you can think of. He generally dislikes people and life in general, with a major disdain for all things cute, cuddly, and wholesome. He's just a bitter old murderer enjoying his favorite pastime of inflicting agony and death on anyone he can reach, especially annoying, attractive teenagers who are incredibly stupid. He also lives in a dilapidated old shack deep in the woods, filled with bones and dismembered body parts, and plenty of unmarked graves throughout his yard. His main weapon will of course be a flamethrower, obviously, as what the hell else would it be after all? A can of tuna? It will be a very old and used looking flamethrower, just like the Pyro himself, which won't look cobbled together like the TF2 one, looking like an actual mass-produced flamethrower with creepy symbols, words, and drawings scratched into it. It will function identically to the one in Team Fortress 2, minus random nonsense obviously, with the air blast from the beginning. However, due to my idea of the Pyro being the ultimate short-ranged class, there's going to be something special to the flame itself, and Afterburn has a way of dealing with enemies bunched up together. It's a way of making the Pyro more useful when dealing with large groups of enemies, and since Team Fortress Neon maps are going to have flank routes out the ass if I have anything to do with it, it will make the Pyro all that more better. Basically, if two teammates are on fire and touch one another, the afterburn damage will turn into mini-crits. And if two players are touching each other while being hit by the Pyro's flame, the flame damage will turn into mini-crits. I know this sounds a bit broken and frustrating, but hear me out. 1. The maps are going to be much bigger, and certain classes will have better methods of evasion and damage reduction, as I've explained already, so it sort of evens itself out. Like I've stated, I've always thought of the Pyro as the ultimate short-range class, so he should theoretically be absolutely deadly at short range, even to a large group of people, making him effective at crowd control while using flanking tactics. Hence why he's a freaking serial killer, as that's what they kind of do in movies, ambushing people and catching them off guard. And the damage increase will only happen when players are touching each other using their hitbox, going back to normal the second they stop bumping into each other. And yes, you can totally set people on fire and air blast them into each other, being deadly to medics and the player they're healing, just meaning the Pyro has to be made a priority target when on the battlefield. His secondary will be a shotgun, but will operate much differently to the normal TF2 Pyro shotgun. It will be an old double-barreled shotgun, rusty and dirty, covered in the same markings as the flamethrower. However, it will have double the firing width. Just imagine what the typical shotgun's bullet spread is, and add 2 extra spreads on each side, and that will be the standard shot. However, you only have 2 shots in each chamber before needing to reload. And I know I said double, and it seems like triple, and only having 2 whips worth of shot may seem more balanced, but we'll have to figure it out in testing if we ever get to that point. Yet again, the shotgun will be good at close to mid-range, with me thinking of having a slightly longer reload, or perhaps more damage fall off earlier than the normal shotgun, but I'm pretty sure 2 rounds in the chamber with the extra wide bullet spread should balance itself out nicely. And you're probably thinking, why not just have the flare gun? It will come in a later update, and yet again, he's supposed to be, and I repeat myself, the ultimate short-range class, with this shotgun being very deadly at short range, driving that point home. His melee weapon will be another old, dirty, worn, slightly broken wood handle axe. The same markings will be on the blade itself, as well as the handle, with a special sinister face carved into the side of the blade. It will function identically to the TF2 fire axe, minus one extra detail. Upon hit, the pyro will receive ammunition for his primary weapon. How much I've yet to decide, but what is balanced enough, with this being an incentive for people to actually use the axe, and not just when they run out of flame and bullets. The in-game lore is that it is cursed, but will grant wishes upon inflicting harm, so the TF-in pyro wished for more fuel to burn more people. The axe will also whisper very gently from time to time in a creepy manner when idle for long enough if it's equipped. Last but certainly not least, the augment, which will be a shield spawned from your flamethrower in a circular pattern made out of flame, much more see-through than the normal flame, so you can see where you're going, that will absolutely eat through your ammunition, but will basically block anything it's facing and completely destroy explosive projectiles without letting them explode. It would be big enough to cover the pyro's body, with maybe a few more inches or a foot or two to cover someone peeking out from behind him, with the shield coming out of the typical flame erupting a foot in front of the pyro, before turning into the large shield part going out sideways. And it'll probably empty your entire clip in about 10 seconds, meaning use it sparingly. Basically, this is a way of getting close enough to the target to actually hit them with your fire or any of your close-range weapons. Also allowing you to protect teammates, giving you another use, and maybe if an explosion hits near enough to you, the splash may be blocked if the shield is like touching the ground, or only maybe slightly reducing the damage. And yet again another reason you've got your melee weapon with the capability of giving you ammunition back. And the name could be like Incendiary Shield, or maybe it should be something more like a serial killer would make up, who knows. And for the pyro himself, what's his name? He won't have one, obviously, as he's supposed to be a mysterious slasher villain, with probably a lot of pseudonyms he's gotten over the years, like the Midnight Butcher, the Masked Madman of Mountain Road, the Flame-Slinging Slasher, and whatever else nonsense I can think of. And on a final note, I don't know if there's going to be an air tank on his back, as technically that was a leftover from TF2, which was going to be used with the flamethrower, but then got scrapped, with you only being able to see the wire it was going to be connected to when yelling medic or giving a thumbs up. So it kind of doesn't make sense considering both TF2 and TF-in pyros have a gas mask on, not rebreathers, so it would ultimately look out of place, but maybe it should be there just to fit the aesthetics. Or maybe it could be replaced with an old fireman's backpack filled with like body parts and bones to fit the new aesthetic of the pyro. Now on to the engineer. He's a simple man, long in the tooth, from a small, sleepy town in the deep south of the United States. But don't let his humble upbringing deceive you, as he has a massive intellect, who is a veteran of many corporate wars and secret combat missions, being a mercenary of many decades. And his name is Dale Conacher, former mercenary of Manco throughout the 60s and 70s. Yep, it's the Team Fortress 2 engineer back in action and continuing his role many years later now, with much more age and wisdom and plenty of technological innovation to help him on the battlefield. Also in the game's lore, he's like responsible for basically most of the augments and weapons, working along with the former TF2 medic Dr. Ludwig as his partner, still working at Manco under Miss Pauling. However, time and the modern day, 1980s, has changed this humble man quite a lot, as well as his many years of combat, perhaps even driving him a little mad along the way. Unlike his former self, he won't be a crazy Texan, but a mad scientist type, kind of like Doc Brown from Back to the Future. So I guess he will be a little crazy, with a little bit of senile thrown in, just for good measure. He'll obviously look the same but older, but he'll be sitting in a floating recliner with a low back part so he can still be headshotted from behind, and floating a few inches off the ground. The chair, that is. He won't be bobbing up and down there or anything, just statically floating there, and he'll still technically be the same height, just sitting in a chair. And he won't actually be floating. He'll still have an invisible hitbox under the chair that will have to be able to take damage, not giving him some weird advantage where like pipe bombs and bullets can go underneath him. Maybe the in-game explanation could be it's hitting the levitation beams under the chair conveniently where his legs would be if he was standing. He's going to be wearing a team light-colored trench coat, the typical smart guy pants, and sweater vest under the trench coat, with maybe like house shoes on his feet, as he's not going to be walking on them, obviously. Instead of the goggles, he'll have reading glasses so you can see his eyes, with nothing but a receding hairline on his head. His left arm, the robotic one, will have a cartoony 80s style hand and wrist on it, like straight out of animation of the era. Also, he'll have a microchip in his head controlling the chair's movements so he can use both hands for weapons and buildings. When he crouches, the chair will just lower down, and he'll smoothly glide across the ground, with jumping just being the chair shooting up shortly. Basically, he's the old fart mentor type figure that used to be around in the good old days of storytelling, with plenty of zany, wacky craziness to him, with a lot of his screws loose. However, this does kind of bring up an issue regarding his actual age, which upon further research is estimated to be around 40, which if he was 40 exactly in 1968, then he'd only be around 59 in 1987 when the game takes place. Not that actually old. Maybe we could say he was in his late 40s at the oldest, then he'd be in his late 60s? I mean, there's not technically an official age, so we could change it to maybe be in his 50s so he could be in his 70s. I mean, people did age faster decades ago, and maybe the gravel wars took their toll. Maybe Dell was just in an accident, as in the actual story he can walk, just not too well, due to his back and knees hurting, due to what was going to be his age. With me even imagining a taunt where he steps out of the chair and clicks his heels together, then painfully while holding his back sits back down. Maybe we'll just make him an old fart after all, saying he just lived a hard life and he aged early. Anyway, first off to his actual buildings, which will get a nice futuristic, 80s style, update to them. They'll have a face! I said futuristic, not manly. Just because he's a hardened war veteran doesn't mean he can't have cute things, damn it. Basically, in the center of the level 1 sentry there will be a computer screen, 1980s looking of course, with the body looking either like a computer or retro 80s robot with the actual gun barrel sticking out like a nose. The face will be very much like the Beatman cosmetic one, but more pixelated. With the level 2 still having the face in the center, losing the roundish body type, looking no longer cobbled together for the sentry in general, still having the dual Gatling guns sticking out, but probably sticking out of the sides, not the front, as not to obscure the face. And yes, the face will emote, either from its health level, getting kills, the engineer dying or getting kills, or taking damage, or whatever else I can think of, with maybe even the thing speaking in a high-pitched robotic voice similar to the ones from Portal 2. And maybe even the damage sound, just being it begging for help or screaming. Level 3 will of course still have the face, but maybe it will get intense pixelated eyebrows to make it look hard. Or maybe just leave it the same to keep the adorable factor. The dispenser will get a futuristic 80s style update too, probably also having the same pixelated face, and instead of a gas pump look, it will look more like a computer monitor of the era, with the fill meter no longer being a knob, but a bar filling up like a loading screen. However, the teleporters won't have faces, as that would just look weird, but they probably will have an arrow on the part you stand on, pointing the direction players will face when they teleport in. Probably only for the exit, that is. But they'll still get the upgraded 80s look to them. Two last things on the buildings. They can be individually swapped out, with both teleporters counting as one object from the main menu screen by clicking on a button under the PDA in the loadout screen, which will come in later with the alternative loadout and future updates. It'll just open up a menu with 3 slots to swap out buildings. The last thing is damage can now travel through buildings but is reduced by 70%. However, as long as it can travel through the hitbox of the buildings, it can still inflict damage such as bullets, explosions, and certain melee weapons such as the sniper's whip. As a player of Team Fortress 2 since 2011, engineer turtling is fucking annoying as hell, and this is finally a way of reducing it heavily. It may be annoying for certain engineers, but you'll just have to think smarter and be more proactive, and not sit there like a freaking bitch hiding behind your damn level 3 sentry. On a final note, when you pick your buildings back up, you'll no longer be marked for death, as that's fucking stupid. But instead the toolbox will have a hitbox, with it having as much health as the building you picked up, meaning in theory you could take a sniper shot to the chest, hitting the box instead, leaving you unscathed but massively damaging your building inside. Or you could turn around taking the hit yourself but protect your building. So in theory you could completely destroy a level 3 sentry before it was ever redeployed, as long as you could sufficiently hit the toolbox it's being held in. Finally onto his primary weapon. It's a shotgun. Just a shotgun, same as in TF2, with this being the only shotgun that functions identically to the TF2 one, but looking like a brand new 1980s shotgun. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, and he'll get a different primary in his alternative loadout, which will be explained later. The secondary will of course be a revolver, which will function identically to the pistol, just visually being a revolver, as why not? Might as well make it something somewhat different and give a nod to his Texas roots. It will probably be a cartoony 6-shooter, or should I say 12-shooter, as it will have just as many rounds in it as the pistol from TF2, and probably be reloaded like the Spy's revolver to make the reloading process just as quick. The melee will of course be a wrench, either being a fancy brand new 1980s wrench, or the old wrench looking very worn but patched up, functioning identical to the Team Fortress one. The PDA will probably look like a 1980s Texas calculator, which won't have the stupid destruction one, as why bother, as it will just take more time to scroll to and destroy shit. The HUD display will look much more fancy than the old one, along with one on the actual screen of the calculator, mirroring what's happening on your HUD, but without the colors and looking sufficiently pixelated, which your teammates could tell what you're about to build, as well as nosy spies peeking over your shoulder. Finally onto the augment, which will bring a whole new style to the gameplay and to the engineer especially. When pressing the augment button, an expensive-looking 1980s laptop will pop out of the side of the engineer's chair, connected to it with a robotic arm, holding it up to the engineer's face. This laptop will act like a second PDA, only allowing you to build one building. Or should I say robot? A robotic dog you could control remotely. SPOT, which stands for Special Provisions Ops Technology, the engineer's latest and greatest invention. This robotic canine will be built just like your standard buildings, first through blueprints, then slowly self-assembling to its final form, sped up through wrench hits. Spot cannot be upgraded, but he can be filled with metal, used for ammunition for his nose gun, and supplying teammates with small ammo pickups shot out of Spot's mouth in round metal containers looking like large crudely painted tennis balls. However, this robotic companion needs to be directly controlled by the engineer himself. Through the laptop, the camera will zoom in until you can fully see through Spot's perspective and take control of his body, allowing you to run, jump, and shoot from your nose gun, doing as much damage as the TF2 Spy's revolver, being Spot's primary and only long-range weapon, as well as secondary fire shooting out your ammunition balls at teammates or enemies if you miss and they walk over them. Spot will be half the size of the engineer and have 100 health, moving at around the speed of the medic. However, he cannot pick up any pickups nor be healed by anyone other than engineers, and once his metal supply is depleted, he needs to be refilled through the engineer's metal or friendly engineers. If Spot is hit with a zapper, he will be incapacitated until it is broken. And he will have a melee in the form of a bite, which is switched to through the reload button, as he will not have to reload. And to enter and exit controlling him, simply press the augment button once he is fully built and you have the laptop equipped. Yes, you get your own freaking robot dog to control while you're turtling in your base, which is exactly what Spot was made for. Also, I literally made up his name while writing this, trying to think of something catchy earlier. And yes, he can taunt, probably only having two. One for the gun, which will just be a gun barrel as his nose, which will also probably shoot slower than the spy's revolver, due to it not needing to reload. And the second for his melee bite. Then again, if you're controlling his body like another mercenary, you could probably actually have a second weapon scroll wheel, meaning you could have a faster firing rate requiring a reload. But you'd probably have to have an animation to show it, which based on my basic design for his look could actually work. I imagine him as a sleek futuristic, for the 1980s, looking robotic dog with a black glass panel, probably peanut shaped, or with a flat bottom and double round top, with team colored pixelated lines for his eyelids and squares for his pupils. Kind of like Sonic's eyes. Although now that I think of it, Spot is kind of like a mix between the dog from Mega Man and a generic robot dog from cartoons. And yes, you can crouch with him, with you jumping at the same height as every other mercenary, making him look like he's jumping higher, but it's just the same height as everybody else. You're also completely vulnerable when you're controlling him as the engineer, being a massive trade-off. When you think there's someone near you, just quickly press the augment button, either twice to get out of controlling him and turn off the laptop, or just once, then hit the scroll wheel to scroll to your last weapon you had equipped. When you're not controlling him, he'll do a sitting animation with his backside on the floor, front legs still standing up straight, his head slooped with a line across his eyes, making it look like they're closed. There'll also be a speaker on his chest, allowing the engineer's voice lines to come through, put through a filter to make it sound like he's coming through a radio, still allowing you to give voice commands. And the animation when the engineer is controlling Spot will just have a bright light coming from the laptop, shining on his face, with it held up to his chest and both hands on it, with the animation of you not controlling Spot, just having the laptop out, while having it further away with only one hand on it. Now along to the spy. In a far-off land, seemingly out of time, with many futuristic technologies existing in the modern day, a lone cyborg girl searches for meaning and her missing memories, wanting to answer the enigma of her past and who exactly she is. Will this lost soul in a silicone body find her way, answering the mystery of her past and just who she once was in Team Fortress Neon, releasing this fall? That's right, the TF Neon Spy is an anime girl straight out of the 1980s. Okay, technically the 1990s, as she's based off of Modoko Kuchanagi from Ghost in the Shell. The manga version, that is, visually and loosely story-wise, as she's going to be much like the soldier, an amalgamation of various 1980s and 90s anime cyborg girl tropes that I can logically put together. And the reason it's the manga version, as she's way less serious than in the movie version or show, which fits the Team Fortress style much better, as well as her much more simplistic and cartoony look fitting in with the cartoony 1980s TF Neon style. Visually, she will look very much just like her, with the same hairstyle, but not being too sexualized with her primary getup. That'll probably come later, lol. I imagine her wearing a jumpsuit with a heavy vest on and boots. But maybe we can take inspiration from her not so revealing outfit she wore in the main series and use that instead for a more visual similarity and an interesting look. And the backstory I gave briefly was just me trying to build up some hype, pulling out some random tropes I remember from fiction, trying to set a scene. I don't know exactly what her backstory will be, much like the soldier, not knowing all of the tropes and what could fit together. I'll probably come up with it if this game ever actually gets made, hopefully with people helping me out in writing it. However, her personality, considering she's a badass cyborg cop, will have to be pretty tough with some edge, given her role in the game, as well as having a comedic and lighthearted side, just like her manga version. She will definitely have much more emotionally charged moments, acting like an actual female, having sad moments of loss and regret, much like female characters from the good old days of storytelling. And she will have an attachment to the engineer's sentry gun and dispenser, with them also being sentient machines, with her regretting to having to destroy them, and hating the engineer for making her do it, and the way he treats them by beating on them, which she will see as abuse and cruelty. I can imagine her having some lines of dialogue such as she saps one of the buildings, whispering softly, "Forgive me, my babies." Sapping another building, still whispering, "Forgive me." After a building explodes, "You made me do that, you son of a bitch." After another building explodes, "Why, God, why?" Backstabbing an engineer, "What's the matter? Don't like it when machines beat on you?" Killing an engineer in general, "Looks like you're the first casualty in the war of machines and men, bucko." And a myriad of insults, hurtful phrases, and mournful quotes after she's destroyed his buildings and whatever else someone who could actually write can think of. And now on to her main weapons and abilities. Her primary weapon will be a pistol, most likely based off of her main pistol she uses in the series. If she has one, I've not checked, that will function identically to the TF2 spy's revolver, with possibly the damage indicator covering all sides of the screen like it is when you're on fire, with you being unable to see where she is exactly, allowing her to ambush enemy players and deal some serious damage before they are able to figure out where she's shooting from. Her melee weapon was originally going to be a knife-sized katana or some other cybernetic blade until it suddenly hit me as I was writing this. It could be a mantis blade coming out of her hand as it folds away, revealing it fitting perfectly with her cybernetic nature. And being awesome as fuck, too! I considered having it come out of one of her fingers, but it probably wouldn't be big enough, making more sense to be concealed in her hand. Maybe having the top part of her hand pop up, then the blade fold out, or something more elaborate to look more visually appealing, with her hand maybe practically unfolding like a transformer to have the blade come out. Her disguise kit won't be a kit at all, but instead software installed into her cybernetic brain, with the icon being either an old software box or retro-looking desktop icon straight out of the 90s. When she actually switches to it, her eyes will light up with her putting two fingers, her index and middle finger, up to the side of her head, with it simply being a computer display appearing to her visually. When she actually disguises, instead of there being a mask appearing to your teammates, there will be a wireframe outline of whatever mercenary she's disguised as, but much more simplistic and 80s looking than the actual wireframe, looking very polygonal surrounding her. When disguising, instead of smoke, a hologram, which is what it's supposed to be, will generate from the floor up, starting as simple shape, changing color, then appearing as parts of the mercenary she's disguising has when disguising in front of enemies. I would also like to implement the mod, with me fully giving credit to the mod maker, where you could make her run at her normal speed while disguising, probably by pressing the reload button while disguised. However, I have my own variant on this, with her able to run at the scout's speed when disguised by pressing the same button, with of course there having to be a downside, with me thinking however faster the scout is comparably to the spy is how much extra damage she should receive when moving at the scout's speed. Like, say, theoretically, if the scout moved 25% faster than the spy, then she should receive a 25% damage penalty to all damage when disguised and using the movement buff. Seems a tad broken, and we may have to increase the damage penalty by just a smidge, but it would actually make disguising as a scout viable and worth something. And it would make the spy much more deadly, using the speed increase to her advantage. The other players would just have to be really cautious when they saw a friendly scout running towards their back. Her cloak wouldn't be a watch, but another program installed into her brain, which may seem a bit disappointing to some, but makes much more sense story-wise and in-universe logic. I considered having her hold up her arm with like a holographic bar that would drain, but it would be much easier to have a bar in the middle of her screen that only she can see, like a heads-up display, making it easier to keep track of your cloak. And when she cloaks, much like in the actual Ghost in the Shell media, squares on her body will change from primary colors to invisible, starting with her feet to her head. Her zapper won't be a zapper. It'll be a hacker. Get it? Because she's a cyborg? And they do that in Ghost in the Shell all the time. And I know I said zapper multiple times before, but I did not want to spoil it, because she's going to hack the buildings instead of placing something on them, with her waving her hands instead, with the buildings instead of having something placed on them will just slump over cartoonishly with sparks and smoke coming out, with the ones with faces wigging out with their eyes rapidly switching between small and big squares, frowning as they're slumped over. And she'll just have her hand out, fingers extended and thumbs sticking out the side, with the visual representation of you being in range, probably just being a chibi drawing of her face, giving the peace sign, outlined in white like the old Zapper's outline, appearing on the building. And the icon will probably just be either her hand next to some computer-looking icon, or something that could be related to hacking in the 90s. And finally onto her augment, which will finally fix one of the greatest problems with both the spy and any character that can turn invisible when attempting to sneak past people in a small room or hallway. The augment will be called Phase Protocol Omega, which will allow you to pass through enemy teammates and buildings for a limited amount of time. Basically a cloak that doesn't turn you invisible but turns off collision detection with enemies and their buildings. It's activated by the augment button and can work while cloaked or disguised or both at the same time, which is literally when it's meant to be used, obviously. Having around the same amount of use time as cloak, also being represented by a bar in the center of the screen, probably underneath your cloak meter. This will allow the spy to finally have no obstacles in their way. Although you'll still take damage when hit, there'll just be nothing to stop you from getting through enemies nor sentry guns, making it all that easier to slip past the other team's defenses. The visual representation will probably be the spy becoming semi-see-through, probably like only 30% opacity, and maybe changing colors slightly, getting more saturated and bright to indicate her molecular change. And yes, you can use this with the Scout's Disguise Speed bonus, meaning you could disguise as the Scout, of course, cloak, phase, and haul ass behind the enemy team, which does sound like a little bit much, but then again, it does make the spy class much more viable in my book, and especially for noobs like me. Just means you have to be more cautious and spray and pray more often to check for spies. And hey, the augments are meant to augment the player's experience, allowing for more diverse play and better strategies, which is their point, this being a perfect example of such. And finally onto last, but certainly not least, the medic. Once upon a time there was a sheltered child born in 1969 in a simple small town. The boy was quite bashful and unathletic, and not exactly the most popular at school, with his daily activities mostly consisting of wedgies, being shoved into lockers, and an astronomical amount of severe beatings from a seemingly infinite amount of bullies that were pretty much everywhere throughout his school years. However, much to this young boy's luck, his boyhood years were throughout the 1970s, and teenage years throughout the 1980s, where he delved heavily into nerd culture. From science fiction to high fantasy, from superhero comics to Dungeons and Dragons, this boy was a certified nerd. Complete with a scrawny frail frame, acne-ridden face, and thick glasses, as well as an aversion to anything physical. minus what he did when his parents were out of the house due to his raging hormones thanks to a scrambled cable signal and adolescent horny desperation. Once this boy finally turned 18 and got free of the hellscape that was high school and school in general, once he graduated, he got a simple job working at the comic shop, until one day he saw a news broadcast about his favorite tabletop role-playing game. Apparently, it was heavily involved in Satanism and the occult, much to his astonishment and his obliviousness. The young man had no idea about the dark arts or the power of magic or the untold benefits he could gain from abusing these dark forces and abilities. But thanks to the newscast explaining it for him, he now knew what to do with the rest of his life, dedicating it to obtaining this dark mystical power. He would become a twisted god of vengeance with nothing or no one ever getting in his way ever again. And it was all thanks to the news telling him about it, as he wouldn't have known otherwise, just spent his time playing D&D, completely blissfully unaware of what dangerous forces he could be wielding. Thanks, newscaster, he thought to himself. Now I'm going to go out and become a dark wizard. But not too late, or else my mom is totally going to yell at me, then ground me for like a week. However, after several months of searching, he realized he needed a larger cash flow than a dead-end store clerk at the seedy side of town, catering to gross weirdos. So using what little magical power he had, he became a mercenary. But much to his chagrin, combat, and especially being shot at, or being hit by explosions, hurt. And they hurt really, really, really badly. So he decided to become adept at healing magic and other forms of support magic, so he wouldn't have to risk his neck directly. And because pain is a cruel mistress, especially for a boy who cries at the death of characters in Saturday morning cartoons. Yes, the Team Fortress Neon Medic is a stereotypical 1980s late teens nerd. Straight out of Revenge of the Nerds or Maniac Mansion or whatever else stereotypical 80s nerd nonsense you can think of the era. However, like most of the TFN characters, he won't just be a blatant stereotype, with him also being based off of a sheltered child. And this is 1980s sheltered, so really sheltered. Meeting the real world as well as obviously him dabbling in magic, whether it be demonic or otherworldly Lovecraft-based, twisting his mind somewhat, which will come out from time to time. So he would be a little bit crazy due to forces outside of his control, and living in the suburbs of either Ohio or Northern California, depending on where stereotypical 80s nerds come from, and having a bit of culture shock, going into the real world exposed to literal corporate wars. Also, he's a huge fan of the Heavy, loving both his live-action show and his cartoon he's ashamed of, having bootlegged versions of his cartoon in his house, which I can see a comic interaction where Jeremy, the TF2 scout, meets the TFN scout for the first time being starstruck. And the medic's just scolding him for losing his mind over a celebrity. Then he sees the Heavy and does a high-pitched shriek in excitement before he says it's whatever the hell his name's going to be. Then he runs up to the Heavy explaining how he has all of his merchandise, including the cartoon, while the Heavy says, "Let's go off someplace far away from your house, so far in fact you can't smell smoke." Or something better written, you get the gist. The Heavy wants to burn down his house to get rid of that cartoon. He will obviously look like a nerd, but probably still have to be the same height as the original medic, but be probably very tall and lanky. He'll of course have pale skin, covered in acne, the typical 80s nerd haircut, and ridiculously thick glasses, with probably very buck teeth, if not just ugly teeth. He will actually be wearing a wizard's costume, going with his personality and the themes of his weapons, which I will be getting into shortly, of course. It won't be homemade, like out of a robe or dish gloves, more like a 1980s wizard's Halloween costume. It'll look cheap, of course. He'll have a light team-colored wizard's robe on, with dark team-colored gloves, with a wizard's hat, with an obviously fake white beard, as well as his normal dorky clothes underneath, which would be worn-down tennis shoes, ugly-looking pants, with a white button-up t-shirt underneath. His personality will of course be nerdy, as well as fish out of water due to him being a sheltered child, and of course a little bit crazy, like stated earlier, due to him dabbling with mystical forces outside of the realm of human comprehension. So socially awkward, intelligent, being easily excitable both in happiness and fear, knowledgeable of pop culture and obscure media, as well as being the typical horny nerd, no doubt hitting on the spy and demo lass, and being painfully rejected, as how else would that scenario play out? Now finally on to his exciting new loadout, which very much changes and keeps some things the same of the familiar formula of the medic, hopefully for the better. We're going to start off with the medigun first, which won't actually be a medigun, as I need to explain how it works first before anything else. Fitting with his theme, it will actually be a book, a magical one of course, which will function identically to the medigun, with one bonus feature. You can heal, and you can shoot, at the same time. That's right. You will no longer be a sitting duck and can actually defend yourself while healing people. I know what you're thinking, but no, the book will not have an ability to attack. You will just be able to switch to your primary or melee weapon while the healing beam is still attached to your target, functioning identically to whether you have the book equipped or not, meaning you'll still have the same radius before it releases once your healing target is too far away. And of course you don't have to hold down the button any longer, just needing to press it once to have it lock on, which is actually a feature in TF2 it took me way too long to figure out. Which was way more comfortable to play medic once I did, and it's needed for this new healing gun/book. Of course alt fire will trigger ubercharge, now referred to as invincible, pronounced invincible, regardless of what weapon you have equipped. The actual invincible effect will just be a bright glow around both players, looking more magical, maybe trying to get a 1980s film effect to fit in with the theme of the game somehow if possible. When you are healing people and switch to a different weapon, the book will just be on the medic's side, like it's connected to his belt, with the healing beam still coming out of it. When you have the book out, no, I don't have a name for it yet, I just know it's going to be something nerdy, and it's going to look like a fancy, actual, real magic book. You can lock onto players by pressing the reload button, keeping you on the same horizontal plane, so if you're like healing the soldier and he uses his street striders, you won't end up dangling down, getting in his way, and you'll still be able to move around like you're walking on a flat surface. This also allows you to stay locked onto scouts double jumping and demo lasses boom bootsing. Now on to his primary, which will be identical to the syringe gun from TF2 in functionality. Sort of. I'd say that would be the case if I hadn't just recently watched a video on just how bad the syringe gun actually is. So if it's going to be based off of it, it's going to have to be a fixed version that makes it actually functional. First off, visually, it's going to be based off a 1950s alien blaster toy, with like the visual placeholder in my head being the alien gun from Fallout 3. So it will be an old blaster's toy modified by magic that shoots out magic balls. Instead of arcing downwards, they will shoot straight, but just evaporate at the point that they would have fallen if they were actual syringes, so it's still limited in its range, but unlike the syringes, the balls will actually be easy to see. However, they will still be affected by momentum, so if you're moving left, they will arc right towards the end of their shot, meaning you still have to compensate. They will be shot faster and of course be more accurate due to no more random BS in neon, and due to one of the complaints about the syringe gun being the slow fire rate. There will be one special feature to the gun that I'll discuss once I talk about the augment shortly, which will definitely make it better than the syringe gun in many ways, but only in unique scenarios. The melee weapon will be a mystical looking knife, probably bought off of a late night infomercial, which I imagine will have a curved blade that will do the same damage as the bone saw, being identical to it, with one special feature, as is per usual with TFN melee weapons, which will be that it will grant health upon hit. I know what you're thinking, why not just have it like the Uber saw, and isn't it redundant that it heals you? The thing is, I know the pros all use the Uber saw and would prefer it, but I'm thinking of everybody. And particularly the noobs as well as casual players who could use that edge in keeping themselves alive just a smidge longer. Obviously the bone saw does 65 damage. The heal won't do 65, probably closer to 30 or 20, maybe even 10, but my thinking is, how many times have you been attacked while healing somebody and the person you're healing is too busy dealing with something else while you're being murdered? The healing life could keep you alive long enough so they could turn around and defend you. And yes, you can still damage them with your primary now, but I don't think you're going to be able to out-damage them before they kill you first, so this is to keep you alive long enough for someone to come and defend you. Hence why it heals you. You are a support class after all and need to be kept alive. And there will be a proper Ubersaw equivalent released in a future update for you hardcore pros out there. Finally onto the augment, which is definitely going to change up how you play medic, even more than being able to shoot and heal at the same time. Simply put, when you're healing certain classes, you can change your primary weapon, the Zapper. I forgot to give it its name earlier, and I don't want to go back and edit it in. Into a unique weapon, one per class, and only when your healing beam is attached. It will be called the Gun Alchemy, which will work by pressing the Augment button when healing a certain class, which the gun will change in a puff of smoke into its new form, taking a second or two. And once the beam detaches, the smoke will redevelop your weapon, changing it back into the Zapper for the same amount of time, leaving you somewhat vulnerable. And the 9 unique weapons will go as followed. When healing the heavy, your weapon will transform into a futuristic, sleek-looking laser gun, based off of a 90s toy I had, that will act like a pistol but of course be much more powerful, as it is your primary, with the ability to charge a shot by holding down primary fire, shooting out a projectile ball of energy that will do more damage but can be reflected and will move slower than your standard bullets. When healing the scout, it will become the stereotypical media magic wand, with the typical star shape at the tip, which will act like a shotgun, allowing you and the scout to become shotgun buddies and double team your enemies. When healing the soldier, it will turn into a paintball gun, shooting out green paintballs that will slow down players, as well as doing damage to a lesser extent than other gun alchemy forms. And yes, I know, people hate this effect really badly and don't want it in TF2, but just because you don't like a gameplay feature doesn't mean it doesn't have merit. And honestly, players only really complain about it when it's on the Natasha, with no one seemingly complaining about the stun effect on the Sandman. Maybe because it's easier to dodge, but I digress. There will be a slowdown fall-off just like damage with distance, and what else could it be with the soldier other than making Splash do more damage, but that would be kind of broken and not work with helping other classes, or use with the soldier's alternative loadout, which I'll get into later either. And it will have to do more slowdown because it's not a freaking minigun. But the medic only has it when he's healing the soldier, so just learn to freaking avoid the shot and kill the medic faster and it won't bother you. When healing the Demolas, it will turn into a stick, vaguely gun-shaped, with a Magic the Gathering type card face up on top of it. That's a magic missile card with a magical glowing miniature bow with an arrow on its side, an inch above the card. It will shoot tiny flaming arrows in an arc one at a time, where upon detonation they will have knockback from splash damage. This is so you can knock enemies into the demo's grenades, or knock them away from you and the demo so as they don't take splash damage from their own explosive. Or perhaps within melee range if the demo was playing with a different set of weapons, if you catch my drift. When healing the sniper, it will turn into a blow dart gun with a scope. Basically like a bamboo stick hollowed out in the middle, with like maybe an airsoft scope on it that will function identically to the Crusader's crossbow. So it heals and harms players based on the projectile's distance traveled, but now you have a scope so it makes it much more easy to hit things from long range. It will reload automatically and the reload button will act as the scope in and out button. This is so that when you're healing a sniper you can actually help out instead of hiding behind a corner, and so that you can actually be taken out by the enemies, nullifying that douchey strategy once and for all. And yes, there will be a proper Crusader's crossbow in a future update, that you won't have to have the zapper and be healing the sniper to use it, as well as doing something different when you're using the Gun Alchemy augment. And I don't know if there should be like a squeeze thing at the back of the dart gun so the medic doesn't have to hold it up to his face and have a blow-in animation with his lip, which would make it easier to animate just having him like squeeze onto something with the other hand instead of using it like an actual blow dart gun. When healing the pyro, it will turn into a miniature serpentine dragon, curling its body around the medic's arm, which will act identically to the flare gun. Except it's a tiny adorable dragon with microscopic wings that you feed like meat and cheese to reload it, which is freaking adorable if I say so myself. So it's just the flare gun in a miniature dragon's body, allowing you to set enemies on fire from a distance and combo with the pyro's flame. And yes, of course the pyro will get his own flare gun in a future update. When healing the engineer, it will turn into a hairdryer with a plasma lamp or plasma globe, I literally just found out what those things are called, sitting on top of it that will have two firing modes. The first mode will act like a flamethrower but using electricity and won't nearly have the reach or damage as the actual flamethrower, but have the ability to drain certain augments and things like the spy's cloak, as well as the ability to break hacks on buildings. The second mode, activated by pressing the reload, with both modes not needing to reload feature, will act like an electrical flare gun, which you can use to hit enemies from afar, having the same effect of draining certain augments, but will have a slow fire rate due to not being able to reload. When healing the spy, it will make the zapper look like a stuffed version of itself, like it's made out of stuffing and fabric, with it also making your healing beam invisible to enemies, and only your teammates will be able to see that your gun looks different. The damage will be reduced significantly, but you will be able to recharge augments and things like Spy's Cloak by shooting at teammates, which would allow you to shoot at friendly spies, disguised as enemies, tricking enemies into attacking you, allowing the spy to get the backstab while you're healing them invisibly, so even if they're shot at, it will maintain the illusion. I can even see a cheeky comic where the spy is being shot at while disguised, then like a pyro goes to attack the medic, then gets backstabbed. Also, you could totally do a surprise invincible catching someone off guard, and this will work with the spy's alternative loadout also. Finally, when healing another medic, your gun will turn into a sword? Wait, what? That's right, a melee weapon instead of long range, which makes sense as one, you can both heal each other and have this weapon out at the same time, and two, it will act identical to the Uber Saw, so you can continue the long tradition of two medics healing each other as they keep an Uber train going. However, you won't be able to charge invincible when it's active, as that would be way too broken, which is why it's a melee weapon, as there's two of you healing each other, and you can have two invincibles in a row, so it had to be somewhat balanced. It will look like a magical sword with a glowing light going up the center to indicate how full invincible is. And of course there will be an official Uber Saw released in a future update that will just be a melee weapon for you hardcore fanatics out there. As for the augment itself, in the loadout screen, it will look like a bronze circle, covered with alchemy symbols and probably references. Also, it will be worn on the medic's belt behind him. It will be bronze when not activated, but turn gold when in use, which is something I literally just thought of. Sometimes my own genius even surprises myself. And it will be worn on the back so you can tell when not facing the medic if he has one of the special weapons activated. And as for the ammunition issue, when a form does more damage, it'll just take more ammo for one projectile to balance things out, with all of the weapons sharing the zapper's ammo pool. There will be a visual indicator for this on the HUD, of course, when the forms are active. Now on to the alternative loadout, or alt loadouts, which will be from day one, based off of the original plans to have updates that change what the classes could do, which is what they sort of did with the Huntsman Sniper and Demo Knight. Note alt loadouts are different from alternative weapons, which are just variants of normal weapons with different stats, with the alternative loadouts having completely different weapons, such as from a sticky bomb launcher to a shield, whereas alternative weapons are like the rocket launcher to the black box. These will be completely different and changes what the class does completely, and they will be for all classes. First up, the Assault Heavy. His primary will radically change his style from a minigun to a cannon. This turns the heavy from a short range to mid-range to a mid-range to long-range class, with the cannon being held and carried much like the minigun, and will need to be deployed like the revving up stage of the minigun. It will have a slow fire rate and readying state between using rounds, with the cannon acting similar to the rocket launcher, or bazooka technically, but will have no splash damage, but the projectile will move much faster and do dramatically more damage to compensate. It's basically a precision weapon meant to counteract engineer nests and groups of players bunched up together, turning the heavy into a literal tank. Minus explosion damage and radius, but having those would kind of make him cross over too much into the soldier and demo las category. And the thing is, it's supposed to kind of be the polar opposite of the heavy, being a very precise long-range weapon instead of spray and pray, and having a big explosion radius. Like an actual cannon would make it way too overpowered and hard to counter. Think of it like a very surgical strike from long range, devastating enemies if you can actually aim. Or you catch them off guard when they're standing still, lol. And yes, it can be deflected by the Pyro's air blast. You just have to be super quick because it's going to be going very fast to make up for the lack of splash damage. And it will hit like a freaking truck, hence the slow firing rate. His secondary will be a shield, similar to the Charge Entard, yet also different in several key ways. It will innately decrease bullet, explosion, and fire damage by 25% passively, much like the demo shield from TF2. However, the shield can be scrolled to and be deployed with it looking like a riot shield, with a window in it covering the entire front half of the heavy's body, from an inch or two off the ground to several inches past his head, with two side parts coming out at a 45-degree angle, covering half of his sides, which will block 100% of all damage the shield absorbs, but will slowly chip away at the shield's personal health. Once the health hits zero, it will no longer be deployable, nor have the passive functionality, leaving you vulnerable. You can heal the shield by collecting ammunition while equipping it, and it will also have around 200 to 300 health, possibly more, depending on how quickly it gets broken. The point of the shield is to protect the heavy while he gets into his long-range firing position with the cannon, and to protect him when he inevitably gets shot back at and needs to retreat. Also, he's supposed to be a tank in this loadout, so some sort of armor would fit the playstyle and theme. His melee weapon will be a large sledgehammer, which will deploy slower and have slower firing rate, but do more damage and more reach, but will have two primary firing modes. Swinging modes, I guess? The primary fire will be a long swing capable of hitting multiple enemies at once, and the secondary will be a sort of charge shot, taking several seconds to do more damage, with the heavy swinging in a downwards arc. The point of this is to compensate for the lack of a shotgun or defensive secondary, allowing the heavy to fight off lone attackers that he meets along the way getting to his far-off position, or that made it out to him, such as scout, spy, or lone soldier, making it easier to hit these quicker classes or do devastating damage if you manage to corner them, saving your cannon shots for properly distanced enemies. And finally, the augment will be a jar of the heavy's world-famous grandmother's chili. It's the sandwich of this game, but better. For one, it will not paralyze you in a taunt when consuming, only putting you into a first-person animation of the heavy pouring the chili into his mouth while manly chewing noises play. Think of like a pit bull eating a steak. So you can still look around, jump, crouch, and run about, but you won't be able to attack. And you can now consume only what you need, with let's just say eating for 10 seconds. Will heal 100% of your health, but if you only eat it for 3 seconds, it will only heal 30% of your health, with 60% of it still left over, being indicated on how full the jar is, allowing you to save it for later or give it to a teammate. This allows you to only heal what you truly need or feel like you need at the time, no longer immobilizing you if you only need a little heal, like a sandwich, and not wasting the entire heal. And when you throw it down with secondary fire, it will just be a jar of chili, no need for a plate. And yes, Warrior's Fury will also work with this taunt, so you can literally punch people to get chili faster. You're hurting people to heal yourself. And finally, since all alt classes will have an alternative skin, which isn't mandatory but just goes with the loadout, like certain cosmetics going with certain weapons, his will probably just look like his Vietnam uniform. Or a tank pilot with a soldier's helmet and flak jacket, or whatever else is Vietnam appropriate era based off of some sort of 80s Vietnam movie. And no, I really don't have a name for any of these other than the chili, being his last name, whatever it will be, as it's from his grandmother. And I sort of have a name for the cannon rolling around in my head vaguely. And these loadouts were thought out to go well with mixing and matching with the other weapons, like using the shield for a more defensive heavy with the traditional minigun, and fist with the chili 2 making you better at defending. Or perhaps using the cannon with the shotgun for attacking at medium range, or using the sledgehammer when defending near an engineer to spy check. Next up is the Movement Assist Scout. In order to explain how this loadout will work, I first have to explain the augment, then the secondary, as they are the main focus, and what are the biggest change-ups for the scout. The augment will be called No More Mr. Nice Guy. This will be a passive augment that will give Scout 30% extra health and a damage increased at the cost of his double jump and some of his speed, essentially turning him into a medium class instead of a light class. This is because he will be an assist class, getting him closer to the medic in terms of health and damage, but removing his mobility. This is because it will no longer be about moving yourself as the scout, but other players through the use of his secondary, which will be a large handgun that shoots out special packets of slime, which once hitting the ground will form special symbols that will give movement buffs to you and your teammates. 3 in total, one being a straight shot shooting you directly forwards in whichever way it's facing, fast enough that a sentry gun couldn't lock on to the player, several feet, possibly a couple dozen. The second being a movement boost, similar to the disciplinary actions boost, but longer and faster, allowing you to go in any direction once you've touched the slime for a few seconds. The third and final will be a vertical shaft, allowing you to go straight up or back down again at your normal walking speed, just like you're swimming for a few dozen feet. It'll have to be able to at least get you to an updated version of Two Fort's battlements. And the thing is, I was thinking of making the new 2 Fort like 3 times as big, just because of how cramped the old 2 Fort is, but maybe not as tall. But then again, there's classes who can literally basically fly, so maybe. I feel as though it had to have some limit, not going on indefinitely, and not reaching maximum height for certain entryways for classes to either jump down from or boost themselves up to for balancing reasons. So essentially, the scout will have buildings in the form of shooting slime balls on the ground, forming special emblems which will stick up a few inches so they can be damaged, and they will have low health but not too low, and they can be destroyed with hacks but not upgraded or fixed. The emblem for the straight shot will just be like the consecutive arrows you see in racing games for boost pads, also indicating on which direction it's facing. The omnidirectional one will just probably be a circle with arrows sticking out in all directions, and the vertical one will probably just be a spiral, with each being a unique color, like green, purple, and orange that are not team specific and can be recognized from afar. The gun itself, like I stated, will look like a funny handgun with a tall body and an elongated pipe on the front, almost looking like a silencer, with a cylinder on the side of it near the top, being where the slime pellets are being held. The body is tall as there will be the 3 patterns on its side, with 3 lights above and 3 lights below each symbol. 1 light below will shine green to indicate which type of slime you have equipped at the moment, and the light on top will be red to indicate when a slime pad is in use, as well as an indicator on your HUD. You will have 12 shots in total, only being able to shoot out 1 of each at a time, with no need for reloading, as the reload button will pull up a menu allowing you to select what type of slime you would like to use, probably visually indicated by the scout holding the gun sideways looking at the buttons. Your melee weapon will be a metal yo-yo with extended reach from the bat, obviously, but significantly less damage, but not as much reach as the sniper's whip, but definitely further than double the length of the bat, maybe like 10 feet or 7. However, secondary fire will allow you to either give a buff to a teammate or debuff to an enemy, allowing you to do both but only one of each. The friendly buff will allow the teammate to jump twice as high and fall twice as far before taking fall damage, which will be reduced by half. The enemy's debuff will decrease their jump by half, including from friendly explosives and even the boom boots, with them taking fall damage at half the distance and fall damage is doubled. This will last a couple seconds, and there will be an orange and purple pattern on the yo-yo itself, with a half circle of each color with 6 interlocking curved lines as the pattern to show you when you have one out or both. And finally, your primary weapon will be 2 pistols, probably a reference to something, I'm sure, that will act essentially as a machine gun, being mid to long range, allowing you to protect your slime pads and teammates while they're using them. They'll obviously do more damage than the standard pistol, being a primary, as they're basically a machine gun disguised as 2 pistols, just to be unique. Also, I forgot to mention the No More Mr. Nice Guy will make the scout stand upright instead of his normal running stance, changing his hitbox and visually indicating that he'll be using it. So the whole point of this alt class, if you hadn't figured it out by now, was instead of the scout moving himself, he moves other players, becoming an assist class. A movement assist class, if you will. And for some reason I imagine his skin from this loadout being like from Miami Vice for some odd reason. I think I've been thinking of the 80s too much. Or maybe it could make him look like John McClane or some other tough guy, probably one without muscles, but who knows. Now on to the Hardened Soldier. I know that name sounds hardcore and a little bit edgy, but I just thought of it, and it fits with the theming of this loadout/alt class. The soldier's primary will be a radical shakeup to the playstyle, as is every alt class, taking him into a new direction. It will be a heavy machine gun, an M249 to be exact, turning the soldier into a mini heavy in the process. Basically a faster movement speed, no need for a spin up, nor any slowdown, but less health and less damage, as well as a tighter spread, meaning you need to be more accurate compared to the heavy. You will also need to reload, with the machine gun either having 200 ammo, 50 per clip, or 100 ammo, 25 per clip. Think of it like the soldier will be to the heavy as the mini sentry or level 2 sentry is to the level 3. This is the only allegory I could think of for TF, with the soldier being a more mobile, lightweight heavy. Your secondary will be a sawed-off shotgun, but will have a massive damage boost, but incredibly short range, which will primarily be used for fighting off scouts, spies, and other classes that get up in your face, so you can save your machine gun ammunition for mid to long range targets. Your melee weapon will be a knife, a Bowie knife, which will do less damage than the police baton, but you can swing it faster. It will have a special effect where for every 25 damage dealt, a mark of blood will appear on the knife's blade, 5 tallies in total, with each tally blocking 10 damage. When the knife is equipped, totaling up to 50% damage blocked when wielding the knife upon full blood marks. You're probably thinking, man, he really doesn't like the escape plan. But I'm just thinking of everyone, not just the pros, and there will be an escape plan type weapon eventually in a future update, but if you hadn't realized by now, this loadout is literally based off of Rambo. Hence why it's his machine gun you're wielding as well as the knife. Couldn't think of the secondary to match though, but the sawed-off shotgun has its practical purpose. Also, there will be a visual indicator above your head, much like the mark of death, to indicate when you're using the knife with the damage block. And technically you can still run away, just without speed, but damage reduction instead. Finally, the augment will be called Lamenting Soldier. This will make you shoot twice as fast and not need to reload when active, taking straight from your reserve ammo, but slowing you down by 50 to 75% and not allowing you to jump. Yet again another Rambo reference, allowing you to spray and pray super hard for a few seconds, but being relatively stuck in place. Also, he'll totally scream like in the movie, and maybe some added particle effects like his eyes glowing red or something. And yes, you can use the bazooka, but you'll probably accidentally blow yourself up if not careful, and you will basically be a sitting duck, so use wisely. Of course, the skin will literally be Rambo, with the camo pants, army boots, the black tank top, with like the necklace he got in the second movie, with the mullet and the bandana. I suppose this means we really gotta make Soldier look like Stallone after all. Moving along to the demo night. As what else could it possibly be? How could I do anything else with the demo lass's alternative loadout when it was already right there in TF2? Her primary will of course be identical to the bootlegger in terms of stats and what it does, but with it being a traditional looking medieval shield worn on her back. Because I don't want to chop off one of her legs, despite some weirdos being into that, and it won't visually go with the aesthetics I'm going for. Her secondary will be a shield, having the same stats as the charge and targe, but much like her primary, it will look much more high fantasy, like something straight out of Dungeons and Dragons. With possibly more of the traditional shield look out of pop culture, not the rounded wooden shield used by the TF2 demo. And this is a bit of a spoiler, but secondary fire will actually make her raise her shield in front of her, increasing its stats, but not allowing her to fire with any weapon nor melee. Yes, this means the augment will be the charge instead of it being attached to the shield itself. And let's just say it increases fire damage resistance by 15 and explosion damage resistance by 25, while adding 25 bullet resistance and 25 melee damage resistance when raising the shield. This may seem a bit broken, but honestly, who uses Demo Night other than on 24-hour 2-fort servers at like 3 a.m., with this actually making the alternative class somewhat viable in normal play? It's a melee-only loadout in a game based off of shooting, so there's got to be some major compensation to make it work. Her melee weapon will of course be a sword, with the same stats and abilities as the Eyelander. It will be a fancy-looking high fantasy sword going with the rest of the loadout. But it won't take heads, as not every kill will be a decapitation, but souls instead. In the center of the sword there will be a fancy Celtic weaving pattern that will slowly fill up with a glow. Yes, again with this, maxing out at 4 just like the heads for the Eyelander. And being killed with a sword will result in random dismemberment, like being cut in half either horizontally or vertically, as well as decapitation and limbs being chopped off, going with the new jibbing system in Neon. And finally, the augment is of course the charge from the shield, but now independent. So you can charge now with the sticky bomb launcher if you want, or use the boom boots to attack from above as a flying knight, making the demo knight even more viable. And yes, she will scream when charging, probably some ridiculous battle cry or some dumb sounding bellow. The skin which will go with this loadout will be a warrior princess dress straight out of D&D, before the censorship, or Xena made out of leather, with leather boots, leather armbands, and her hair in a long weaving ponytail. Basically, the sexy warrior princess straight out of the 80s. I get the feeling this will be a very popular skin, lol. Next up is the Hunter Sniper, or for you TF2 players, the Huntsman Sniper. His primary will be a crossbow instead of a bow for reasons I'll get into very soon, which will function identically to the Huntsman, minus one feature. There will be no slowdown upon charging the arrow, as it is a crossbow after all, but it will have a slow reload to balance it out. The reason for this is literally as I was writing down how the new sniper works, the long shot, I realized just how much more powerful it would be at medium range, and knew I had to do something to make the bow and arrow much more powerful, hence removing the slowdown and turning it into a crossbow, being the explanation for why it doesn't have it. Another reason is who actually plays Huntsman Sniper seriously, much like the Demo Knight, which is why I'm going to change the rest of the loadout also, making his alternative loadout much more viable in normal play, just like the Demo's one. And the crossbow will be very fancy and expensive looking, like a rich man's crossbow, probably also called something very fancy with a nickname for the other mercenaries. His secondary will be his own version of the Durati, functioning identically minus a few upgrades. Since throwing piss is the TF2 sniper's thing and he's a rich snob anyway above such things, he'll throw an extremely expensive bottle of wine. It'll make players lose the will to live because it will make them feel inadequate because of how expensive it is and how lower class it makes them feel instead of it just being gross like Girardi. However, it will leave a cloud of wine much like the gas passer, lingering for its duration on players, about 10 seconds, and covering the radius of its splash. The cloud will descend when thrown at walls, and will now deal damage to buildings about 3 damage per second. This is of course to make the wine, Girardi, actually useful in normal matches, hence the upgrades. His melee weapon will be a large combat knife having less damage than the whip and the normal range of the kukri, but will fire much faster. It will have a secondary fire where the sniper holds it in the stabbing position above his head, charging it up, slowing his movement speed, where upon hit it will do much more damage and cause the bleed effect like the tribalman's shib, with the bleed lasting the same duration. The charge will take several seconds and you will be slowed down significantly. But this is better for being up close and personal than sniping far off. His augment will be a small, strange-looking mushroom, which he will eat to cause himself special effects. The effects will cause the background to lose color and look washed out, while enemy players will appear bright red for the few seconds duration while removing flinch. Damage that makes you jump a little, knocking you out of scope with the sniper rifle or charge with the bow, and heavily reducing knockback. However, if the player does not get enough kills or any, once the duration of the mushroom has worn off, the player's screen will become fuzzy and they will receive the disorient effect. This effect will cause the player's camera to swing in random directions. Not too fast, mind you, I don't want to make people sick. For several seconds, heavily throwing off their aim and movement. But if the player gets kills, this effect will be nullified, with each subsequent kill reducing its length, maxing out at 5, completely nullifying the effect. And there'll probably be some visual indicator like the sniper's eyes going pink with some cartoony particle effects around his head, with him speaking lines sounding stoned. And yes, I'm aware there was going to be an effect like this in Team Fortress 2 with the original Scout's grenade called the Dizzy effect, which I swear I thought of this before I heard that. But who knows nor cares, you can get hopped up on mushrooms and shoot enemies with a crossbow as a rich guy. And maybe you'll be able to throw it, and it may heal teammates just slightly but not too much. Or maybe it'll decrease their damage fall off, giving their weapons longer range for a few seconds for something unique and more like the sniper. His skin will probably be some sort of toned down ghillie suit. Like maybe just a soldier's uniform with a hat or helmet covered in leaves with like a camo jacket, like he's supposed to be a hunter but a hunter of people, like a black ops soldier taking people out in the bush. Moving along to the area denial pyro. Before I get into this, I just have to say this is the only clash/alternative clash I honestly considered redoing due to the nature of the gameplay, which I will be getting into shortly. Despite the fact that once I finalized everything, it flowed together so nicely, it's just the main gimmick may not be that fun for certain players, making it very unpopular. So I'm just going to get into the weapons, which should explain, other than the name that is, what exactly this alternative loadout does. For his primary weapon, it will be a 3-pronged handheld water cannon called the Tridro cannon. Get it? Tridro, like in hydro has in water, and tri has in 3. I considered calling it the Denier, but I like the first name better, and that name will probably be better for the secondary. This water cannon will have 3 separate barrels branching out from the center one, with each pointing straight out like a trident. Another reason for the name. Shooting out 3 streams of water at once, which will either have the range of the flamethrower or half the distance depending on balance. You can hit multiple enemies at once with each stream. Like imagine 3 heavies standing side by side, you can hit them at the same time. However, this will do less damage than the typical flamethrower and obviously have no afterburn effect due to it being, well, water. However, it will push enemies back when being hit by the water streams. It will push them to the very edge of the damage hitbox so they still take damage, and they can only stop themselves by walking directly towards the water stream, with skilled enough pyros being able to use strafing to circumvent this. The secondary fire will shoot out 3 large beams of water, which will have double the range of the flamethrower's flame, but do 0 damage, only pushing enemies back at an accelerated rate, with them only being able to slow themselves by walking straight at the beams. This will consume far less ammunition than normal fire, due to no damage and its basic function being to repel players. You're probably starting to understand the alternative class's name now. But I'm not quite sure if it'll either slow down projectiles or be able to reflect them, but they'll have to be within direct line of fire and touch the water for several seconds, as it would be too broken if it was instantaneously, unlike the air blast, because it's continuous. Having it slow projectiles might be kind of hard to program and not too useful, other than letting the engineer pick up his sentry and run. But if it does reflect, you won't be able to do something stupid like hit them from the side, briefly, needing to hit them head on and touch the water for a few seconds to actually shoot it back. His secondary will be a special glass container holding a small typhoon inside, which once thrown and upon hitting the floor or any surface, the waterspout will increase in size, growing very wide, wide enough to cover slightly more than a capture point or cart's capture area. The Typhoon will operate exactly like the secondary fire of the Tridro cannon, pushing enemies back quickly, with them only being able to slow themselves down, walking towards the center point. However, it will only be less than a foot tall, or half a foot tall, so it is still possible for enemy teammates to jump over and keep the point or cart still being captured, but at a great disadvantage, continually having to jump unless they got further into the maelstrom. And no, you can't capture anything in midair, so Street Strider will only be useful for getting to the center and staying on it, with it lasting maybe 30 seconds. And of course it won't put out your or teammates' fire, nor will the Tridro cannon's water either, with friendly medics using the gun alchemy still being able to burn enemies as you pin them with your water from your primary or secondary. I can see a funny explanation in the tutorial levels from Miss Polly, not understanding how this works and questioning reality as she explains the process. And I suppose they'll both be able to put out burning teammates, with this loadout also being possibly an anti-pyro, well, pyro. And this literally just hit me as I was writing this down, despite it being obvious using water. And his melee weapon will be a riot police baton. You may be starting to recognize a pattern here. It will do slightly less than the axe, but have a faster fire rate, and have a special secondary alt fire, represented by lights on the tip of the baton, probably red and blue, when not activated to indicate when it's ready to be used. This alt fire will give the enemy a special effect where all damage causes knockback, and all knockback resistances are nullified, including the Tridro cannon and the portable Typhoon. His augment will be called the Adrenaline Rush, and when activated will reduce 65 to 75% of all damage for a few seconds. However, once it wears off, 50% of all damage taken will be immediately gained back. So if you hadn't figured it out by now, he's based off of a riot cop, and he's supposed to defend areas by knocking enemies away, hence his loadout. And the skin, of course, will be a riot cop outfit with the helmet visor being completely black behind the glass, with just thin red lines and red pupils straight out of a Looney Tunes cartoon. I can imagine a comic where he's just murdered some actual riot cop, and you can just see the guy's feet sticking out from a wall, while the pyro digs around in some locker, dressed up in the skin, indicating it was the uniform he took off the dead guy. Then another cop comes in thinking he's an actual cop and takes him out to deal with a riot, where he gets his hands on experimental anti-riot tech, with him ending up liking it, being the weapons from this loadout. Hence the issue of how fun it can be pushing people around exactly. I mean, the primary fire of the Tridro cannon does do damage, and you can theoretically pin enemies to walls, trapping them, and I imagine maybe the secondary can push enemies up walls, pinning them in high places, making them easy targets. But then again, how fun would that be, just holding someone there while they get killed by someone else? This is why I thought of scrapping it, but once I figured out Riot Cop, and made the main gun a water cannon. It came together so brilliantly, especially as an opposite to the normal pyro, and that's before I realized the water could put out the fire, making him a counter pyro on top of an area denial class. But who knows, this is just me coming up with ideas. It's hard to tell if people would take to this idea, or if this concept could ever actually work in an actual game. And I did consider having like a shotgun that shot rubber bullets that knocked enemy players back, but that really wouldn't go with the normal pyro, as what good would that do you, especially with the air blast already? And I mean you could use the mini typhoon to knock a bunch of players together in a hallway or big room, then get them with the mini crit fire damage while they're touching. And the adrenaline rush will be great for suicide runs as the normal pyro, or just a last minute defend like it was meant for. And yes, the shield still works. It will probably be blue and made out of water if using the tridro cannon. Now on to the combat engineer. We're going to start with the buildings first, as they're the main tools of the class after all. And since you can individually swap out buildings in your PDA, the engineer will be receiving brand new variants of existing buildings he can change at will. Your sentry will of course be the mini sentry gun, this time no longer attached exclusively to a melee weapon thankfully, which will operate exactly as its TF2 counterpart. It will still look like the level 1 sentry with a face, but it will have a square box with rounded edges, wrapped with wire, tied off in a knot, making it look like a bandana, with a hard look on its face, and maybe some extra paint on it, to distinguish it more like the original. Yes, the mini sentry is supposed to look like a badass with a cutesy pixelated face. Your dispenser will be a mini dispenser, which will be half the height of the level 1 dispenser, with much less health, and cannot be upgraded, which instead of being placed down, will be carried upon the engineer's back. It will give you smaller amounts of ammunition, health, and metal at a time, but at a much quicker rate, and have a much smaller radius to reach teammates. When on the engineer's back, it can block damage and not allow backstab, but once destroyed not by the engineer himself, it will deal 25 damage to the engineer. In order to fix or break hacks on the mini dispenser, you need to go into your PDA, where there will be a new button under the PDA image in the menu, causing a wrench to come out on a robotic arm from the dispenser itself and hit itself. Kind of a funny image to think of, but it fits the game style, I suppose. However, there's a big downside to a literal portable mini dispenser due to the nature of it, which will be it will require fuel in the form of metal. This will be indicated by a bar on the dispenser itself and in the engineer's HUD, which the fuel gauge will need to be filled up by collecting metal, which will go straight into the mini dispenser's fuel supply first, but will be drained by every action such as healing and resupplying. With this process speeding up for every player receiving aid, maxing out at 5 players for maximum drain speed. If there's no more fuel, then there's no more healing or resupplying until the dispenser is filled up once again. And let's just say theoretically, for every like 1 metal you put in through the fuel supply, you'll get like 3 or 5 metal back out, and whatever amount of ammunition and healing. Basically, you get more out than you put in for obvious reasons, but it will be balanced, of course. This was just to explain how it may work. Your teleporters will be mini teleporters. I think I'm seeing a pattern here, which will count as one building so you can't mix and match entrances and exits. These teleporters will have less health, but set up much faster and require less metal to build, and teleport players faster, with the caveat being only 5 players can be teleported before the exit breaks, but the entrance will be left just fine. The idea is it's supposed to be an emergency teleporter, quickly thrown down to teleport in a bunch of teammates before breaking, kind of like a spray and pray teleporter. And you'll just throw down another one when you need to, but there may have to be some sort of cooldown to make it balanced, and this will be especially useful since if you're using the full set of buildings, you won't be using metal to upgrade anything, so you'll have some reserve to throw out a couple more teleporters. I know there's been ideas for other engineer buildings like a launch pad, but that's kind of the Scout's alternative class idea to move players, and how else could a mini teleporter work exactly? I think the spray and pray emergency teleporter model would be the only way to do it, hence why I designed it that way. Now on to his primary. It will be a rifle. Just a rifle, finally giving the engineer a medium to long range weapon. Yes, I know there's the Rescue Ranger, but like it has its major downsides due to other features, and this is straight up just about doing damage. So it will be like a hunting rifle with a clip, so it will function kind of like a less powerful sniper, but not have the inverted damage fall off of the long shot, and not have a scope. So just a long-range single-shot gun for the engineer, making him better at engaging in combat, hence the name, instead of turtling in one position hiding behind his level 3 sentry. His secondary will be a single-shot dart gun, which will fire one large dart, automatically reloading afterwards. The dart will do damage, but function as a tracking device for your sentry, locking its fire onto whomever or whatever it hits, even outside of its normal operating range. I feel as though it can't be infinite, as that might be too broken, unless it was only when it hit like a surface instead of a player, as I feel as though once the player hit by the dart goes around the wall, it shouldn't be able to track them, just stalling out for a couple seconds before continuing its normal tracking habit. Pressing the reload button will turn off the tracking of the dart, setting things back to normal, hence why there's no reloading. The weapon will probably look like a pistol-style dart gun, and is meant to prioritize certain targets when in heavy combat. Or if there's some asshole peeking around a corner picking off your buildings, you can shoot the floor right next to where they are, and either get them with splash from your rockets or hit them with the bullets when they try and peek out. Your melee will be a much larger, more intimidating looking metal fist, which I guess since the engineer does have a robotic arm, it would be much easier to put on. It will function somewhat like the gunslinger, with several major differences, such as no longer giving you a 25 health bonus or being required for the mini-sentry. The reasoning being is you're probably going to be carrying around the mini dispenser while using it, so you'll already be healing yourself, so there's no need for the bonus. However, there will be no sentry build speed increase, as that would be kind of redundant and not very useful with the other buildings and the other sentry you can now use with it, so instead it will use half of the metal required for healing damage. And yes, it will have the third successful punch in a row will always crit, now having a visual indicator on your HUD, which will indicate when building the combo, and how much time is left, 1 second per punch, just like the gunslinger, before it wears off. Two more final things to balance it out. One being your upgrade speed will be decreased by half, and in order to do full damage, it will take metal for damage dealt. And once metal is fully depleted, it will only do half damage and no longer have the 3-hit combo, with this visually being represented by the fist becoming rusty and broken looking. I know this may seem odd, but it's the best thing I could think of to keep it balanced, now that you can use it with any sentry and there's a dispenser on your back, and it's not like you're going to be using that metal too much when in full alternative loadout anyway. Finally on to the augment, the controller. Not an actual controller technically, I just thought of the name as writing this, which will be another PDA type thing, which visually in my head looks like a Game Gear, but will operate as the Wrangler, with the twist being you control your sentry now from first person anywhere on the map, just like Spot the robotic dog. Obviously the sentry can't move, with you still being able to move the engineer around while controlling the sentry's aim. So you can still technically ninja-near yourself, but from the sentry's perspective. However, only 25% damage will be blocked, with the in-game universe explanation being the AI of the sentry is now dedicated to shielding it, while the engineer controls it, instead of the insane doubling of the health like with the Wrangler. Unless this is actually required for balance, then it will be back up to half of the damage, and visually the face of the sentry will have a pixelated face of the engineer, probably based off his TF2 look, with a team-colored force field surrounding the sentry only an inch off its surface, looking more sleek. And there will be a cooldown like the Wrangler once you release your sentry from your control. And the skin will either be a hunting suit like he's covered in camo including the chair, or like a military mechanic with overalls and tools sticking out wearing like a hat with a brim and maybe some sunglasses, and maybe the chair will look like one of those fancy mechanic chairs that can fold down to the floor to get under cars. Next up is the support spy. This will be a dramatic shake-up to the spy's playstyle, as per these alt classes, but much more than usual, as there hadn't been any real major shake-ups with the spy's playstyle in TF2. So first I must discuss what will be the alternative to the disguise kit, which will be the focal point of this alt class, which will be a small handheld book only slightly bigger than a smartphone, which instead of disguising the spy, it will allow her to grant special bonuses, 3 in total, to her teammates. Hence the name. These 3 spells, it's a spellbook, will give distinct buffs each that Go has. The first buff will be a damage increase at around 25 to 30%, with the second buff being a damage reduction, most likely at the same rate, with the third buff being called Swiftness. I don't really have names for the other 2 yet. Which will increase your firing speed and reload rate, and yes, it can stack, but probably in a limited quantity with the Lamenting Soldier. However, only 1 spell can be put on a teammate at a time, but all 3 can be active at once on different teammates, with a duration lasting around several seconds, or a minute or 2, or possibly longer depending on how effective they are. Also, they may do a little bit of damage if they hit an enemy, with me considering having them do a debuff, but that might just be a little bit overpowered unless it was very brief. Adding to this, her cloak will be swapped out with a passive damage increase, buffing her up closer to a mid-range class from a light range due to her becoming a support class now. And in the loadout menu, it will probably just look like another software box with maybe a visual indicator like the shape of her eyes changing to a more intimidating look, like how certain characters in anime have sort of slanted eyes when portrayed as tough. Continuing on with this, her hacker will be swapped out with a health bonus of 25. Another passive item represented by a software box, which will make scrolling through your secondary, primary, and melee much faster now that your scroll wheel has 2 less items to get through, which will work with the more aggressive, combat-heavy support playstyle. Her primary will be a machine gun, probably based off the one from Ghost in the Shell. It'll be more spray and pray, with her standard handgun being more surgical and suited for one-on-one, with the machine gun being more suited for in the midst of a chaotic battlefield with multiple enemies. Or if you're just bad at aiming and your plane has the standard spy and just need to spray down a hallway at a fast encroaching enemy. It'll obviously do less damage than a handgun per bullet, but shoot faster because it is a machine gun with multiple bullets going out at a time. Her melee will just be her fists. Just bare-knuckle brawling from the half-machine lady, with her fist doing more damage than the knife, but not having the backstab, with instead a 3-hit combo in a row, resulting in the disorient effect. There will be a time limit like the Wrangler when it comes to getting the combo, with a visual indicator also. Her augment will be a self-heal, one where she enters a meditative position in the form of a taunt, which she can do exponentially, but is stuck in the taunt when healing, and is vulnerable. It'll take several seconds to fully heal, but you can sit as long as you want, only exiting when you try and move or press any button. Get it? She's a magic girl who helps out her team and kicks butt. At least that's what I was going for. Her skin will be a schoolgirl uniform with probably a different hairstyle, more straightened downwards, with the armband based off the class leaders from Japanese high schools. I think that's what they're called. I'm too lazy to look it up, and the reason she doesn't just have a magic girl outfit is because that would look way too ridiculous, so I figured I'd have to tone it down, and the schoolgirl uniform still fits for the anime aesthetic she's got going on. And as for mixing and matching, you could use the health bonus and the damage increase, only relying on disguises and flank routes to become an ultra assassin spy. You would survive better in one-on-one encounters, and while you're being shot in the back, survive long enough to take out a couple of the enemy teammates. This would work especially if they did not have an engineer, not needing the hacker at all. Although when it comes to the spellbook, I'm not sure how useful it could be to a normal spy. Hence why I considered the debuff or having the actual buff last much longer, so you could still buff teammates and run around doing spy things behind enemy lines. But who knows, we will cross that bridge when we get there, and I'm sure somebody could think of something. And finally, we are on to the shielding medic. Before I get started, I have to get the theme out of the way first, which is a mix of high fantasy and science fiction, very much inspired by 80s Saturday morning cartoons such as He-Man and Thundercats. Think of like there being technology like computers and other forms of machinery, but there still will be like magic and medieval sword fights going on, with weird alien monsters similar to fantasy creatures but with a science fiction twist. And I know this seems very similar to his main theme already, but that's more of just a normal, real-world guy finding and using magic. So it's not really either high fantasy per se, nor science fiction, but it'll all make sense once I explain his loadout. Speaking of which, starting off with the item swapping out for the healing book, I don't remember if I gave it a name or not, it will be a high-tech magical staff. It will have a robotic skull on the top part, looking like it's made out of metal, bolted together with glowing eye holes facing away from the medic. Instead of it healing teammates through a healing beam, it will instead shoot out projectiles in an arc that will give your teammates shields. These shields will act exactly like overheal, but obviously last much longer, being from around several seconds to maybe a minute or a few minutes depending on balance. The way this item builds up its equivalent of invincible is by your teammates taking damage, damaging the shields you gave them. The invincible will be called Shield Day, pronounced Shield Day, and once deployed by secondary fire, instead of making you and a teammate invincible, it will activate a large see-through shield in front of the medic based off of the projectile shield from MVM. With some major changes obviously, not damaging enemies or blocking them from passing through it, as that would be way too fucking unbalanced. It will however block all enemy damage, including splash, so they can't hit you near the shield, getting you anyway, vaporizing projectiles, and allowing teammates to shoot through it just fine. The shield will spawn a foot in front of the medic, with it being completely flat, unlike the projectile shield, looking like a large hologram, probably a fancy border around it, to make it look more fanciful, with it being at least 2 medic tall, and 3 players on each side of the medic across. Or at least 2 players with a space in between them where a third player can shoot through on either side of the medic, and much like the projectile shield, it will be directly in front of the medic, unable to be positioned upwards or downwards. And yet you can activate it just like the invincible, even with other weapons equipped. Essentially, this playstyle is, whereas the normal invincible is like a spear, this would be like a blunt swinging object, or a shotgun blast. Instead of one invincible player attacking, it will be a whole bunch of tougher players in play, and a team push, dramatically changing the dynamic. Now on to the primary. It will be based off of the Bloodsucker, still being a projectile-based weapon, with the fixes much like his main primary. It will look like a laser gun, or I suppose laser rifle, straight out of an 80s cartoon or action figure box, with it doing more damage and having longer range, for a more aggressive playstyle, as well as still healing you 3 health upon hit. But as a downside, it will turn off your innate healing abilities, requiring you to use outside sources or the gun itself. And it will just shut off the healing function instead of doing the incredibly janky thing of just damaging you like the Bloodsucker does, which honestly proves just how piss poorly put together TF2 truly was at some times, and it won't be a downside when using it in randomizer. Seriously, the medic's healing will be adjustable, whether it be slowing it down, or speeding it up, or just turning it off, just so we can have some more alt classes not limited by bad design choices. Also, the gun will be called the Heal Hurter, and when using the Gun Alchemy augment, it won't physically change the gun. Maybe lights that'll be on it will change color, but instead changes what it does when it hits enemies, such as, instead of healing you, maybe replenishes its own ammo or charges invincible. And it will open up a menu letting you choose between the 3 when you press the augment button, allowing you to select which one you want. His melee weapon will be a medieval mace with high-tech flare, of course, probably just some lightning going between the spikes, as well as some electronics on it with some flashing lights. It will deploy slower but do much more damage and swing slower, but upon kill it will give everyone around you in the immediate area 30 shields including yourself. And yes, you can give yourself shields normally too, and the limit is 50 per player just like Overheal, which I forgot to mention, but you can keep spamming it, hence why it's limited by being an arc weapon. The augment will be a magical action figure of a robotic teddy bear on a cloud, which you will throw out going in a straight line, and once hitting a teammate a larger variant will appear above their head, removing the toy aesthetic, appearing much more like from an actual show. Rain will rain down from the cloud, giving the player healing them for as long as the bear is there, as well as the bear itself shooting down projectiles, with a laser coming out of its mouth, with it making an angry face when it shoots from its normal cutesy face. However, this laser can only hit one at a time, with it prioritizing bigger threats, and will have a cooldown, with this allowing one solo teammate to flank the enemy team during the big push. I know this sounds freaking weird, but it's inspired by like a more metal version of the Care Bears, and like the robotic dog bear thing from Thundercats, and like the weird cybernetic dog thing from the 70s Battlestar Galactica. You get what I'm going for, right? The animal sidekick or weird comic relief character meant to appeal to young children, with this augmenting the playstyle even further, with this allowing a lone player to go much more rogue during more aggressive pushes from their teammates, catching the enemies off guard. Also, it will be stored in a mint condition collector's toy box on the back of the medic, and when it's out it won't be in the box, obviously, with the box's top being open. So you could tell if it was in play, and maybe it will last a minute or two, possibly longer depending on balance. The skin I imagine just being just like a spandex suit with maybe some crazy 80s patterns and colors on the front, as I don't think a metal speedo would work very well with the neon medic. And no one would want to see that. With a plastic looking helmet straight out of an 80s cartoon like Man-at-Arms helmet. You could think of it as he's dressed up like a very obscure character or one of the action figures based on a character that wasn't seen in the show, or maybe it's like his OC character he's cosplaying has on a budget. But before we move along to the next section, I'm going to describe two final pseudo-alternative classes that are not full sets, but only a few special weapons based on fan favorites. That will be added sort of as half jokes and half people really love these playstyles, so they'll definitely have to be in day one. The first one, of course, has to be the Market Gardener Soldier, which will just consist of the rocket jumper, now the air bazooka, which will look like an air cannon, with the placeholder in my head, looking similar to the direct hit, squished downward in on itself. It will function identically to the rocket jumper, with the added feature of a switch on the side, activated by Alt-Fire, which can switch between needing to reload and taking straight from reserve ammo, not needing to reload, allowing you to jump about until your heart's content, or training yourself to rocket jump with normal bazookas. You'll shoot out balls of air, but unlike the rocket jumper, you can actually knock enemies about, but still do no damage, so it will be somewhat useful to people not rocket jumping, in some way at least. I suppose you could knock them up and have them take fall damage, or shoot them off a cliff. It will come with a melee, which will function identically to the Market Gardener, but visually look like a hammer. This hammer will display flames off the hammerhead when your crit is possible, giving you an indication which will help out new players. The augment, sorry there's no secondary, I did tell you it wasn't a full loadout, will be called the Hardass and will be a passive augment, working either like the gunboats or man treads, whichever hardcore market gardeners would prefer. And in the loadout screen, it will just be like an x-ray of foot bones with like metal around them, or something, so you don't actually think it's like actually something to do with your ass. No skin sadly either, but maybe an actual cosmetic, maybe an Evel Knievel style helmet. The second joke loadout, let's just call them, will be the Pyro Shark. Your melee will of course function identically to the Neon Annihilator, but look like a trident. Maybe with like some bitchin' lightning going between the spikes and looking very fancy. Your secondary will be a set of scuba flippers allowing you to move twice as fast underwater, and jump twice as high when on land, so they aren't completely worthless when outside of water. And yes, you will wear them on his feet so you can see them, and it will definitely change the footstep sound effect. His augment, no, you don't get a primary for this one, will be called Eerie Diver and increase your air supply by 75%, allowing you to stay underwater 75% longer, and will reduce your fall damage by 75%, making it actually useful outside of water too, and so you can do sneak attacks from above. And maybe he'll have like a hat that's a baseball cap, like the shark fin on top, and shark teeth on the rim, and shark eyes on the cap itself, so you could totally do the Jaws thing, and scare the shit out of players in water. Also, you can just use the Tridro cannon, as it shoots you backwards when fired underwater, and just go backwards to go faster, and you could totally use the Trident with the Tridro cannon, or the Typhoon to totally combo their asses.